Fine. Great.
It's fine.
All right, so again, everyone, I'm excited for our very last days of grad school for this year. We are focusing on the field of social work today. So I would like to introduce our two faculty members today. Both are coming from the Cal State Fullerton Masters of Social Work program, which is one of our linkage partners through the Allied Health Academy. Dr. Michelle Martin actually has her MSW and a PhD in peace studies, which is pretty cool, something that you probably don't typically hear about, right? So perhaps you can tell us a little bit more about that later. And Professor Duan Tran, did I pronounce that? Okay. Has decades of experience working in the community, is also a professor as well. So they will go through a little bit of their own classes, so they teach different things, and then also incorporating some opportunities for discussion. And as usual, we'll have time for questions at the end. Right, so thank you.
So just out of curiosity, so the class that I teach is the fields class, which is as part of the social work program requires students to be in an internship for 2 years, because the program is a 2-year program. And so with my class, it's primarily a processing class. And so there's definitely required readings, but there's no papers, there's no exams or whatever, but it's more processing. And what we usually process is what's going on with the students at their field placements. And so, you know, you're in a placement where you could be working with a kid or an adult or whatever, and there may be issues that may come up, whether it's an issue where not, you know, trying to figure out what's the best modality or try to have a treatment plan to kind of work with that particular client, or it could be something that's more personal related, and we'll talk a little more about that later on here. As far as like in my class, what we would do is we would process, and everyone has to participate, and so it's not like one can avoid it. And so in my classroom, we actually have the class size to about no more than 15, and the reason why is because we're going to be talking about a lot of stuff that may be very personal, and so we want to make sure that the students feel comfortable and safe and not be too intimidated by the class size. Because I know undergrad, like my class, average class size was like 300 students. And so there's absolutely no way to be able to do any of that stuff. And so that's one of the differences that that with my class is unique in that sense.
So I started my career in social work. I've worked in a lot of different practice settings. Victim advocacy as a school social worker in LA Unified School District. I had my private practice for 5 years. But then eventually evolved probably about 10 years ago into teaching, and then became increasingly interested in policy. So social work is a very unique field in that we deal with practice on what are called different levels. So micro practice, so that would be the practice, what a lot of people think of the helping fields working with individuals. We do what's called meso work, which is also something often associated with social work, and we're working with groups of people, running, facilitating groups, and I have done that as well. And then also we work on what's called a macro level, when that's working with communities, or it can even go up to a global level. So the longer I was in this field, the more I started off not really wanting to have anything to do with policy, because policy is kind of confusing, and again, you're talking about different levels, local policy, state policy, federal policy, and it's politics a lot of times. And so I wasn't really interested in that. I was more interested in working with individuals. But the longer I was in the career, the more I realized how legislation and then policy, which relates to how legislation is implemented, how much that impacted our clients' lives. And clients being, it could be communities or it could be individuals. And also our career, relates to everything from family law to funding programs to how people are viewed depending upon their situation in life. So So that is what drove me ultimately to get a PhD outside. So I have a master's in social work, and then I have another master's in policy. And then my PhD is in peace studies, which is actually under the umbrella of international relations. So it's in political science. Bringing that back into, so some of the things that I'm really interested in and that I teach in my classes, so I teach the policy classes with a few other professors. We teach primarily policy. And policy could be history of this, focus primarily on social welfare policy. So what policies and what legislation exists in the United States that focus on well-being. So that could be anything from Social Security to public assistance programs, and it's even broader than that. We talk a lot about how are people who are struggling with poverty, how are they viewed? What about people who are struggling with mental illness? So we have a real strong focus on social problems, social injustice. And then I also teach the policy analysis course. So there's a history of social welfare policy. What are the social welfare policies of the United States, and what's our history? And then also, now that we know what they are, how do we analyze them to know whether they're effective or not? And then that gets paired with direct practice, right? Because if you're working in the field, you need to know what legislation there is that kind of drives those issues, and then also alleviates them. Poverty alleviation programs would be an example of that. And if any of you are watching the news, you know we're in a much different place right now than we were a year ago with regard to at-risk populations and immigration, refugees, et cetera. And so it's become, this class that I just finished teaching was really probably more interactive than ever because of the dynamics. And advocacy is a big part of that. So social workers were obligated to advocate on a macro level as well as directly for our clients. So this semester, just as an example, I had students do an advocacy project where they had to identify a social problem. They needed to identify federal legislation that was intended to respond to that, analyze it, basically write a policy analysis brief where they would then identify problems with it and make recommendations. And then they had to engage in advocacy. And so, but I had them do the advocacy solely online using Twitter and online petitions and Facebook. And it's interesting, social workers were not always the most techy. And so there was some resistance in the beginning, and then once they got going, they really got into it. And we did presentations in one of my classes last night, and one of the groups was advocating for Syrian refugees. They got 15,000 signatures on an online petition. And they were able to identify that it went to all 50 states, and it reached 10 different countries. So now they're sold. So it's an interesting career because we tap into so many different areas. It's so multifaceted.
So just by chance, I know Erin kind of like did a quick spot check on you guys. Did you guys get a chance to read the article that was sent to you guys? One of the things I want to kind of talk about is just like with the first case study that was on there with the single mom. So did anyone not read the case so that we can kind of go over that? It's okay, there's no shame. You gonna read? Okay. I read the first page, but I didn't read. I appreciate your honesty. We'll go with that. Who else? Anyone else didn't read this? Okay.
Who's hiding behind the recognition? So this is like a real graduate class.
Yeah. So what we're gonna try to do, or at least what I'd like to do, is just kind of going off of this first case scenario, is kind of use it as if what happens if this was your client. Okay. So just really quick recap. This is a single mom with one child and with a 5-year-old boy. 34-year-old mom who is currently living with her mother. And her mother, she's just came out of a divorce, I believe, and has experienced a lot of domestic violence and substance abuse from the father. Mom, her mother, the client's mother, is also very controlling and is very negative towards her daughter. And so my question for you guys in class is, if this was your client, what would be your course of action and how does that make you feel? So Jocelyn, right? So we're just gonna go around, because that's how this class works, is that everyone's gonna have an opportunity to kind of talk about how this particular client is affecting you personally, but also how would you work with this client, right? And so having some basic understanding of what needs to be done, and we can kind of go from there. We can obviously tweak it a little bit to kind of, make it just for this intensive person.
So I can go through so what I'm gonna do first though is we're gonna go through so social work has several different kind of underlying foundational theories that help us frame, or approaches, that help us frame how we approach human problems, that is quite different than other helping professions. So I think we've gone over most of this, but one of the things that I want to focus on is different than other helping fields, is that we have a really strong focus on social justice issues. So we have a private practice. You might work with a wide range of clients. If you're a psychologist, you can select your clients usually. But in social work, we're usually working with agencies, and we're working with what are called mandated clients oftentimes. And our focus, both as a profession as well as in our individual work, is typically on marginalization, what members of society have been marginalized, and then what members are vulnerable, or we would call that at-risk populations. And then I mentioned before, our clients, when we use the word clients, we could be referring to individuals, families, small groups, organizations, and communities. Okay, so we say clients or client systems. So when you think about, I'm just going to go through some of this real quickly just to kind of lay a foundation. So when you think about why people need help and why they may be coming to social workers or an agency for assistance, here are some of, we live in a society that praises people based on their self-sufficiency. A lot of people, you may have heard some of that rhetoric when politicians are talking about the importance of self-sufficiency and not relying on others for help. But the reality is that that's not true for any of us. We have families, we have friends, we have social institutions we can go to for assistance. But there are a lot of people in our society that face challenges that make it difficult for them to achieve that level of optimal functioning. And here are just some of the things: poverty, racism, mental illness, housing, food insecurity, family problems, child welfare issues, aging, violence and abuse, healthcare challenges, and then I put a question mark here because I wanted to see, when you think of those case studies that we're going to be talking about, what I'm doing is I'm leading you into a theory that we use, or an approach that helps us evaluate individuals within their environment. And so what are some other things that you can think of just real quickly that people confront in their lives or experience that may create barriers to optimal functioning?
Grief or losses.
Right, if someone's had a lot of losses, particularly earlier in life. So what we know about grief now is that people don't just go through those, succinct phases and then they're okay. Grief is actually a part of life, and we re-experience our losses with every developmental stage, from cradle to grave. And so grief and loss is a good example of that. And these are obviously not mutually exclusive, they're overlapping. They all kind of interact. If you're dealing with grief and loss and it's unresolved, it exacerbates mental illness, depression, anxiety. It may make you unable to work because you're experiencing such grief and loss, and so they're all interrelated. Could anyone else think of
Not being a citizen?
Absolutely, immigration status, right? So what we know now is that immigrants, even unauthorized immigrants, oftentimes they contribute far more than they're getting back. They don't get the benefits, but they're contributing significantly. So, right, that limits you. Even if you need to call them, what do we know now? People aren't calling the police for everyday things because they're fearful of their immigration status. So it creates significant barriers. What about a natural disaster? Right? Again, we like to think of ourselves as being independent and self-sufficient, but I grew up here, but I lived in Chicago for 20 years. We got tornadoes all the time. If a tornado comes through your neighborhood, or here, earthquake, you're going to need to rely on other people. for help. So the ecological systems approach is one of the models that we use, or the approaches that we use in understanding our clients and evaluating them, approaching them. And that's the assumption of this is that human problems are derived, this is right out of the article, from the complex interplay of psychological, social, economic, political, and physical forces. We have to consider these different systems when we're evaluating our clients. And if you think about, psychology in its traditional form, you would work with a client and you would, meet with them maybe once a week, and then they would tell you all their problems and you would diagnose them. So it's very much based on a medical model. And social work is not. Social work is based upon a social model. It comes from the field of sociology, actually. And so we are looking at the environment that people are dealing with or are living in. And then we're looking at what's called a transactional relationship between the various systems that people operate within and how they handle those. But we don't look at we don't pathologize the individual. We may pathologize society. We may say this is a racism. It's a problem within society. And then our focus would be on helping our clients interact more effectively with that system and however it's manifesting. And so again, we're looking at how our focus is on increasing well-being and optimal functioning in our client systems. And then how can we help them basically navigate their environment more effectively. So we look at we call them ecosystems. There's a lot of different terms, but when you think about the individual, I've got a schematic a little bit later in the middle, and then all the different systems that they're operating within. Here are just a few. You could probably come up with many, many more, but when you think of yourself, and certainly when you think of these clients, your case studies that we're going to be talking about, how do people interact with, what's the influence? How are people interacting? Do they promote growth and well-being? Do they create barriers to growth and well-being? When you think about all the things that you have to do to get here to school, there's things that elevate you and there's things that hold you back. And each one of those things may be representative of a system. So family, friends, neighborhood, employer, educational system, legal system. What are a couple others you think of? What about gender? Maybe church community, race, or ethnicity, and any sort of things that you would identify yourself as. You're a Mexican-American, female, college student. Those are all systems that you're interacting with that influence you in some way. So here's an example of how we would envision this. And then these are different levels, the things that are closest to you that you may have your microsystems that you would have daily interaction with. The mesosystem, school, neighborhood, work, home. Exosystem, mass media, aren't we all influenced by that? All we hear now is about fake news. We're influenced by it, but also I would include social media in that. So there's all these studies that show how social media can help us feel increased connectedness, but also can increase isolation as we are struggling in our daily lives and we go online and we see all these people have these great lives. Community services, if you've got kids, their school, your workplace, your school. And then the macro system is the shared cultural values, your beliefs, your customs, the laws that we live in, right? So the reason why this is important, the example that oftentimes I use is if I'm working with, let's say, a woman who is constantly fearful that her kids are going to be hurt, and so it limits her functioning. Well, you would need to know a lot more about her and her environment before you decided whether she was paranoid or whether her feelings were adaptive, right? You need to know about her neighborhood, crime, what her background is, what her experiences have been, etc. before you would just look at that. And so often in the helping fields, we've been in the situation where we pathologize the individual. We never consider, again and again and again, people who are struggling with poverty get blamed and they're stigmatized. And people aren't considering the broader context of what they're dealing with. So I'm just real quickly, the transactional relationship. Another term for what I'm talking about is
person and environment. So that's actually kind of a level below the ecological systems approach. So in the person and environment, we're just looking at the person and their environment and trying to understand it. But the ecological systems theory goes a step further and makes the assumption that the nature of your relationship with your various systems will determine your quality of life. And if we can focus on that then in terms of helping people cope. So we never just look at the individual and talk about their own pathology or depression or whatever. We always look at the environment and the relationship of that. So when you think about these cases that we're going to be talking about, some of the things to think about is how can we approach them using what we call a strengths perspective. Everyone has strengths. Avoid pathologizing them, and then look at their interaction with the different systems that are in those case studies, and look at how is that shaping their personal functioning. You know, how are they influenced by their environment? And a big thing that we do as social workers, we help clients reframe. So if they're viewing I'm a bad person because I'm in a negative environment and I'm being blamed for everything, how can we reframe that for them so they can see it from a different perspective and kind of get out of that corner that they may be feeling like they're in. And then I think I'll stop here because I gave a little bit of history, but because of the sake of time, why don't we, I just gave a little bit of history in terms, I'll leave this up there if you want to take a look at it, that just gives a little bit of history in terms of how social work evolved into this profession that focuses as much or sometimes even more on the social environment than we do on the person.
So, like Dr. Martin has said, we talk about the person and environment, or she talked about the person and environment. So with this first particular case, one of the things that I try to do in my class is really help you guys gain a better understanding of their perspective, because everyone comes in with a perspective, right? And sometimes that perspective may be very narrow-minded in many ways. Sometimes it may be dead on correct. But the problem that I see with a lot of students is that, or at least my goal is to really help you guys gain as what, put yourself in a different lens, which is more of a wide angle lens than that macro lens that a lot of you guys come in with. And so with that wide angle lens, hopefully you guys can see maybe 5, 6 different perspectives, right? And so with that said, with this particular case here, what are some of the environmental factors that you see with this particular case? And then we'll kind of go and we'll talk about strength, and then we'll also talk, like I said, about how you would work with this particular case and how does this particular case make you feel? Because the other piece to this is not only do we worry about how you guys address these particular cases, but we also worry about how it affects you guys personally. Because this is a very intensive field, just like a lot of fields that you guys are looking to go into. There's always that concern that cases like this that may have similarity to your own personal life, that may conjure up certain emotions, feelings, or thought process that may be not as conducive for you to be a successful student or ultimately a successful clinician. Okay, so person and environment. Let's talk about Mary. What do we know about her, and what do we know about how the environment is shaping Mary?
Her relationship with her mom was driving her negative.
Okay, good.
The loss, or the divorce. Her independence from her mother, and care for her, provide the money to provide for her child, like childcare. And also because of that, she has.
Okay.
Just giving it her previous attempts at counseling and then kind of giving up on herself and not returning.
Okay. Okay. How do you think that affected her?
I think when it said that she didn't return, she felt that she would let her counselor down.
Right.
So she got embarrassed and then couldn't take herself to take that next step to either go back or just try and ask for help again from somebody else.
Right. So in my mind, I'm like, okay, maybe not only that she's embarrassed, but then she may think that she's a loser because she failed and has given up. Not only failed with counseling, but also marriage, and now she's, 34-year-old woman who's living at home with her mom, right?
I also related that how her mom tells her, like, oh, you're gonna fail and then just come back. Like maybe she had that feeling to count.
Right.
I failed and how would I?
Perfect, yeah.
So her mom was like overpowering her, so abusive, and he does all of the drugs and like smoking. So that's kind of like affecting her environment.
Okay, perfect.
Maybe lack of financial support, or maybe maybe external help. Maybe there's nothing on the outside, or maybe helping situation, or maybe understanding the situation.
I guess her constant failure is how she deals with it, because there's certain people who are gonna keep on going and I'm not gonna stop trying. But there's people who shut down after they fail once.
So as you can see, there's some common themes that we're talking about, right? So we're gonna shift gears really quick. You know, the other thing that Dr. Martin also mentioned is, you know, one of the big things in social work is that we really want to be strength-based. Question, what is strength-based? What do you think that means?
Focus on the person's strengths and how they can use it to get out of the situation, the bad situation.
I like that. Anyone want to add to that?
Having the ability to like come out of the situation needed.
Okay. What else?
So you kind of be their strong foundation, someone that isn't gonna tell them that they are failing and that they're the only one that is mistakes.
Right. I like that because so many times we focus not only on the patient or the client, but we also need to look at our own perception as how we look at this particular case. Because when you read this, or when you experience a client who has these similar issues, you know, what do you kind of, you know, and again, one of the things that we want to talk about and be open about is like, what's the first thing that comes into your mind about when you have a client like this? Like if I was to say, okay, what's your first thought process about Mary? If she comes into your office, sits down, shares with you her story, you know, in the first 10, 20 minutes, what's going through your head about Mary?
I think the first thing I thought was assessing for the child and his safety.
Okay, I like that. What about you?
Just working with someone that build herself confident. She seems really scared of future things that could happen, but she won't advance if she doesn't take a risk.
Anyone else has anything? What about for you guys as far as other things that comes into your mind when you're talking to a patient or a client who has this type of history?
I feel pity for her.
Okay, so you feel pity for her? Anyone feels like she deserved it because she married the wrong guy and, you know, this is what happens and, you know, now she's a loser because she is actually staying, you know, a 34-year-old woman staying at her mom's house? My question is, I want to challenge you guys with this on that. You know, I know that maybe come across that, wow, that's kind of cold-hearted, but I really want to challenge you guys because part of this is understanding your own perception and your own biases as well, right? Because how we look at this particular client in whatever lens we look at will determine how you treat this person in therapy. We have to be mindful of our own biases when it comes to this, okay? So strengths, let's talk about some strengths, as Dr. Martin mentioned. You know, we're very strength-based when it comes to social work, right? So knowing this case, the brief scenario that we kind of laid out for you guys, what are some of the strengths that you can identify with this particular client?
She cares a lot about her child and is wealthy.
Okay, so she cares, I like that.
Even though she was intimidated to seek for professional help, she came and to see the social worker, you know, in the counselor, the old counselor, but she still seeks professional help.
Okay, I love that.
She's resilient, definitely.
Okay, good.
To get out of an abusive relationship.
Yeah, right? It takes a hard, it's, you know, to get out of an abusive, you know, DV relationship, it takes a lot of energy, especially with a 5-year-old, right? But yeah, what other strengths?
Ability to tell her story, because sometimes you can't tell the story, you will hide it.
I like that. Very nice.
Shame plays a big role in that. So that's one of the things that I always look at when working with clients is, you know, they say guilt tells you you've done something wrong, you need to
address that. And then the guilt should go away at some point. But shame is enduring and it influences our perceptions and our behavior and it causes us to shrink away. And so that's a great point to evaluate the shame our clients are feeling has a lot to do, more than apathy, or lack of caring or indifference about their situation. Oftentimes it's shame that they're feeling that causes them to shrink back and not be more proactive about their situations.
Couple more strengths with this particular client.
I think she's cautious, and I think that's something good to have because she's so worried about things that are going to happen, so she doesn't want to kind of jump into new apartments. But you kind of have to be cautious to not make more bad decisions that are just going to keep snowballing.
Right, so it kind of looks like she's trying to actively plan and strategize, all the potential issues that may come up. What if I lose a job, if I rent an apartment, then I might get evicted, or about childcare, right? One more strengths that you can then identify with this particular case. Think outside the box, perhaps.
Maybe patience, maybe after everything she's been through, maybe she's still hopeful that there is change.
I like that. Okay, so we have a really good list of strengths, right? So let's talk about how we can use these strengths to kind of help this particular client. So if this was your client, knowing the strengths that we kind of identified, how would you work with this particular client?
So she has a lot of hypothetical thoughts. What if I get laid off? Or what if everything goes wrong? So like all the strengths that she comes in with, I think that the professional will be able to help her switch those negative hypotheticals into positive ones so that she can.
Can you give me an example?
Like how she says, what if I get laid off my job? She can say something like, what if I get a raise? What if I get promoted?
Okay.
What if I find childcare and they're not considered under better?
What about like reframing a strength about being cautious or planning in reference to that particular scenario as far as what if I get laid off? How would you reframe using that strength, please? Because you are the clinician, right? You are the social worker working this. So how would you tell mom, in addressing her anxiety about, about potentially being laid off, knowing that we have already identified the strength, but she's cautious, or she's
Maybe giving her like an educational statement, how there's help out there to find jobs if she were ever to get laid off.
okay. So I really noticed that you plan a lot and that you're taking into consideration that potentially you might get laid off. But also, let's talk about planning about resources that may be available if you do get laid off, right? You see how we kind of work into that? Okay. How would you talk about mom's need for childcare or concerns about childcare? Because that was another issue that she brought up, right? So how can you identify, again, knowing stuff that you identified as far as strength, how can you use that as to kind of address her concerns about childcare?
Yes, we could try and find a program like at schools. I know there's certain schools that you can drop off the child around a certain time early in the morning, pick them up after 6. So find a school that offers that.
Okay. Good. We're going to switch gears a little bit just because I know this is semi-modified demo. But one thing I also want to kind of talk about is, which I mentioned earlier, which is how does this case, if this was your client, how does it affect or does not affect you personally? Anyone reading this case can relate to this case? And if so, how does that affect you personally?
It doesn't really relate to me, but I feel like it's a pretty hopeful case. If she can find childcare and if she can find a job, and I'm sure if they work with her, how she thinks, her thought process she would be able to save up and maybe go somewhere that's a better environment for her and her child.
Anyone else wants to share on how this was your case, whether or not it would affect you personally or not?
I think it would affect me in a way of me wanting to help as much as possible and kind of having to draw that line of, no, you can't babysit that child to help her out. That's just my personality of, I just want to give as much as possible to help this person.
And that's great, because we get a lot of students that reflect on that and have that insight about, wow, it's like, I can kind of relate. It's like, I was maybe in a position similar to this where, a single parent, and man, I just wish someone could help me like I could help this person, right? But I think you having a really good understanding of those boundaries that we need to deal with. Because part of the class also talks about is your policies and procedures, right? Because like Professor Martin mentioned, for me, policy and procedure means everything in this business, right? And the reason why I say that is because you can be the best social worker in the world, or an OT, or an SLP, or whatever it is that you guys want to do. But if you don't have an understanding of the agency's policy and procedure, you will not last. I've worked in many agencies before, and I've hired some really, really good clinicians. And they come in, they kick butt, and all of a sudden, 2 weeks later, they're burnt out and they're done. And that's because they don't understand the policy and procedure. They start going, because they don't have those boundaries, then they start going into these areas where they're like, oh, here's my phone number. Call me whenever you need it because I'm right here to help you because I want to help you. And they lose sight of what their roles are. And so part of this class is to kind of really help you find what your role as a social worker is and what you're capable of doing and what you're capable of not, or what you should not be doing. Really tricky, especially in an internship. We talk about a lot with how in grad school, I always give the lecture that you are no longer undergrads, and as grad students, I treat you as a professional, and I treat you as a colleague. And so with that said, what are some of the expectations of being a professional? Anybody? What does a professional look like? Okay. How does that correlate to as far as dressing is concerned? How do you dress as a professional? How should you dress?
More reserved, so nobody feels uncomfortable.
Right. Now, I was an undergrad once. And I know I don't have the best fashion sense in the world, and so I do openly admit that. But sometimes, we're in California. It's hot outside. I see students, sometimes they wear shorts, tank tops, or whatever. Professionals, we can't do that. I don't care how hot it is. It's just, that's not appropriate. And so part of the class is also helping students understand what that looks like. How many people text everybody, right? How many people text their bosses? Some of you guys? Anybody? Nobody? Good. I do. And there's an art to texting, right? We all text LOL, emojis, right? But when you text professionally, it has to be a little different in mindset, because whatever you text is now evidence, for better or for worse, in many ways. And so one thing that I try to tell students is understanding how this affects this, your particular client, right? Yes.
I will mention though that sometimes students email me as though it's a text.
Yeah.
So try to not do that so much.
That's something that we we talk to our students about as well. It's like, you cannot email as if, your intern, your field instructor, as if they were your best friend, or, hey, just kidding, da da da. There's none of that sense, and so it has to be very mindful, it has to be very scripted in many ways, that you got to be professional in that sense, right? And it's just also how you act and how you talk, because now you are treating and working with people that you're directly, potentially affecting them for the rest of their lives. And so you need to take those things into consideration.
I would even go so far as to say that you might have a comfort level with email with your supervisor and colleagues, and there may not be anything inappropriate in there, but everything you write, imagine that a judge may view it. And I know for me, I was in a situation where I tend to banter a lot, and it was colleagues and supervisors, and we all did that. And it was something, it wasn't a bad thing, but when at some point our emails all got subpoenaed, and there was nothing in there that was necessarily inappropriate, but I realized, my gosh, why did I feel the need to put 3 exclamation points there? Like I'm making a joke and haha, 5 exclamation points, and I'm like, I sounded like I was 13 years old. And I thought after that, even though that wasn't a significant thing, I thought, we sometimes go back and forth and we're talking about one issue that's kind of serious, and then we branch off into something else. And if you always have the idea, it's so easy to go casual. If you always have the attitude in mind that a third party, whether it's our dean or whether it's a judge or whether it's a supervisor, may view work-related emails and texts, keep that presence of mind at all times. And I would even add too, with social media, nothing's private anymore. Nothing. So as soon as even at this point now, things that may feel very comfortable to you, that wouldn't be considered inappropriate, but you have to ask yourself, what would a supervisor say, or what would a grad program say if they didn't have context and they saw this? So even now, my son is graduating from college, and he's getting ready to apply to law school, and what their director said is take, delete, just clean it up. Even if you don't think it's inappropriate, if you're at a party with just be careful at all times, because you just never know how you think something's private and it will pop up somewhere when you least expect it.
We look, and I tell my students all the time, when they're looking to intern, or even when they're applying into the program, I use the story all the time. In Chicago, there was a student who was applying to law school, got accepted. He graduated law school, was applying to a firm, was conditionally offered a job at the firm. Well, before he went in and signed, the contract, the law firm did a background check on him. And lo and behold, his Facebook page came up, and he was in a fraternity, and he had pictures of him drinking beer and doing all this other stuff. They rescinded the offer. Now, he tried to sue them, and it didn't go anywhere. He lost. And one of the things that I tell the students is that you gotta be very careful, even when you're applying for an internship. Like I said, when I was an administrator and when I was hiring my staff, we do a pretty thorough check, and that includes your Facebook, your Instagram, whatever it is, we do it. And one of the things that we had a student who was applying for, or was interviewing for an internship position at a substance abuse treatment center, and I don't know how they do it, but they found out, and I don't know if it's Instagram, but you have like your name and then all these little emojis after your name. I don't know which. I'm not very good with social media, but he had one, and his was this name, and then he had like a mug of beer and one of those martini glasses and all that stuff. And he was interviewing for a substance abuse based off of his emojis, just his emojis only. He did not get accepted that position. Now you can sit here and say, well, that's really hypercritical. But the thing that I would challenge you guys as my students is that, is it really? Because for you to have that, and you're going to be working in substance abuse, your perception has always, like this, ready? How is that perception going to transfer over to your clients? And it does. And I started off by saying, we all come in with a very different lens. And one thing I want to kind of share with you guys is how wide angle can you make those lenses so that you have 10,000 different perceptions if possible. The example I always tell my students, day one is, if you're driving to school, which most of you guys drive, right, to school? So if you're driving to school and a lady cuts in front of you and slams on her brakes and then speeds up, what's your thought process about that particular person? Anyone want to guess? How would you feel about that person? What do you think about that person? Drives you nuts. What else? Anyone else have a different thought process other than I can't believe she cut me off, you know, or runs a red light or whatever, right?
She might be, running late.
Ah, here's the strength base coming in. Here's a different perception coming in. I love this. Running late.
Yeah.
Right?
Maybe she has an emergency problem with her family members.
Ah, now you really think outside the box. Maybe there's an emergency that may warrant her to kind of confront you to go somewhere, right? What else? Maybe she's ready to learn how to drive. A little scary, but yeah, right? We all experience that. What else?
I guess she could not have seen me.
Ah. See, so as you can see, maybe she's going to a job interview and she's running late. This is her first job in 6 months, and if she doesn't get this job, and if she's late, she's not going to get the job, and she's rent is due and all this stuff, right? So all this stuff I'm throwing out there, would that change your perception of how you view this person, other than she cut you off and it pisses you off, right? Does it soften it a little bit, maybe? Right? We don't know what the issue is, right? But for you guys as social worker, as students, one thing that's what we want to do, at least in my class, is to kind of really open that up. And just that clear example, hopefully it gives you an understanding of how, at least how I view social work and how we look at it as a practice, and so that you can help better serve your clients. All right. How are we doing?
It's 12:30. One more thing I wanted to mention about social media and how you present yourself, or even communication with faculty or with supervisors. We all think of ourselves as honest, ethical people, but most of us can probably think back of our history, think of a time when we weren't completely honest about why we didn't go to work or why we missed class. With social media now, well, we should never have done that. I was guilty of it when I was an undergraduate. But particularly with social media now, we need to be careful. There's an ethical component to most careers. For social work, we have an ethical standard that students are bound by, as well as professionals. And it basically states that we're honest, we're ethical. And what I had a student once, actually several of us had a student who, if she didn't make it to class, would say that he was sick, very, very sick. And as a parent, I kind of tapped into the drama associated with it. And what he didn't realize was that he would, the few times that he did this, he went out, had a friend visiting, and was out having fun, and the friend tagged Cal State Fullerton. And I managed the social media, so I saw it. And so you wouldn't normally think of that, but with social media, or so it just adds another layer. We love the easy way we can communicate with our supervisors and with our professors, with text or with email. We love to be able to be connected with people through social media, but all of those wonderful channels of communication all provides return channels. And I've had situations where students of mine maybe complained about a client on Facebook. And they didn't say the name, and they just made some general comment. But one student in particular I had, this was Chicago, actually got let go from an internship because it ended up with people liking it, somehow ending popping up on the agency. And it was just enough information that it violated confidentiality, even though a name wasn't mentioned. It was enough.
That happens all the time here too. Yeah. Not just, again, I think we had 4 years ago, we had a student who was very general and was just venting and saying, oh, I hate my internship. Or like a scenario where she was like, I can't believe I'm gonna have to work with this particular client. I don't know what to do. This client frustrates me. And it was so general, she thought that it was easy enough. But because she posted that, it got around enough where people deemed that it was a breach of confidentiality. And guess what? Her career as a social worker is no longer, at least not with Cal State Fullerton. it's done. Like, we let her go.
And when we did the same thing, and on top of that, it just plain is unethical. I mean, imagine if you were the client and you saw something like that. I mean, we get so used to documenting our daily life. We had situations where interns were taking pictures of kids at a function and posting it on Instagram, and not thinking about the fact that that's a violation of confidentiality to post pictures. So those are all things that, you know, social work in particular is a very sensitive field, but a lot of the fields that your medical fields, you're going to be in those same situations where you have to have that presence.
So hopefully we kind of give you a little taste of what social work program looks like, at least in my class and also Dr. Martin's class. Questions, comments?
I have a question. So for your class, only 15 students, but in other like classes like yours, is 25?
So my classes usually have between 30 and 33 students, and that's high. I mean, I think that's maximum. Yeah, so we try to keep it around 30 for the.
Yeah, some of the academic classes, just because of the nature of the classes, they're a little higher, but because my class is more processing, actually it's like 99% processing. Then we try to keep it a little small.
In a field like social work, thinking about like the assignments that we do, like what is the balance between like writing more of those reflection pieces and writing more like academic papers?
Great question.
Yeah, in my classes, they do a lot of writing academic. So writing a policy brief was a different type of writing. So I pound in APA and formal academic writing. And then when they get to the policy analysis class, I have to say, don't write policy. Policy writing is much more direct, much more succinct. And then academic writing, is a much more formal tone, and use APA, so APA style and formatting. So I would say it's balanced. In my classes, I try to do at least one significant formal paper per semester, if not more. But I'll oftentimes take a bigger assignment and break it up. Some of our students come in very writing proficient, but a lot of them aren't. They've never written a literature review before. They don't know what APA is. And so for first year, I actually piloted something this year that I think I'm going to continue to use, where I've used Google Docs. And I've always had students send me drafts. They're unsure, kind of want an informal. On our first class, we make it more formal. They have to submit a draft before they submit the final. But what I piloted this year is using technology more and having them write it on Google Docs and share that with me so that I can kind of poke my head in all the way along, and it's not just one formal draft that they're rushing to get out. I can actually see the progress. It also benefits students because they don't tend to wait to the last minute to start their paper if they know that I have access to it from the very beginning. So what I'll do is I'll go in and poke my head in. I literally call it that, poking my head in from time to time, and then I can provide feedback right in there, comments that they can then incorporate that. And I do that with groups, and I do that with individual paper. I did that this semester with both. And it worked well.
In the practice class, so that's where you learn some of the interventions and theories. There is the final assignment is a processing paper about really reflecting back on your own biases and some of your own issues that you may have. And I sometimes have students when they say, well, I don't have any issues. And I'm like, no. I think it's just whether or not we want to acknowledge or identify it. And some people handle things better than others, obviously. I don't say that we all have major issues, but I think there's always issues one way or another that has, again, Erin had mentioned, with this, with the starting of the, icebreaker. It's like what always has shaped and changed us. We all tend to use the positive experiences, but we can always definitely, include those negative experiences as well, right? And so part of that is understanding that, because again, students really need to kind of understand. Again, I tell students all the time, it's like, don't go into the field of social work to do therapy for yourself or therapy for your family member or your spouse or your partners. That's an expensive treatment, and it's not going to work. So you really need to come in and having some really good insights or gain those insights so that you can really come out well-rounded enough so that you can really effectively work your
Having said that, most of us go into the field because of something in our lives. And so the challenge, what he's talking about is to deal with those issues before you, so that your focus can stay on the client. It's oftentimes going through those crises that help us become more empathetic and understanding of other people's. But I think we've seen probably a little bit too much with professionals who haven't resolved their own issues, haven't even started the process, and bring an unfortunate dynamic into that relationship where they're unable to separate their own issue. And boundaries is what we kind of started this off talking about. It's like, how do you keep from giving your clients your home number and telling them that you'll be there for them day and night? You have boundaries. And also boundaries are in our life what keep us from crossing lines and keep us healthy. So those are particularly important in this field.
In social work, how does the job market look? Is it high in demand or is it saturated, or how does it look?
It's a great question. So I didn't know what to expect from you guys. So I brought these little things that I kind of give out to when I do these input sessions. Oops. But to answer your question in general, the market is really strong. Like it always has been strong. It's just because, and the reason why is because the sheet I just handed to you guys, as you can see, it's pretty much very broad as far as what you can do with a social work degree. And so the cool thing is people always think, well, I can only do, I can't do therapy. I can only go and take kids out of their houses and all this stuff. It's such more broad than just that. There is child protective services, there is individual therapy, there's group therapy, there's family therapy. And then on top of that, as Dr. Martin said, that's just the micro level. You haven't even talked about the meso and the macro level. There's politicians that could be social workers. There's, county supervisors who are MSWs. And so it really just depends on what you want to do. We have an alum who actually is at Disneyland in the HR department using her social work degree. How, you would ask, and how does that connect? Well, as an HR person, she's interviewing people and she's using her assessment skills that she learned in school as she's interviewed to kind of see whether or not this particular applicant is a good fit for Disneyland or not. And so it just kind of really depends on, I always tell people, it's like having an MSW degree and getting a job is only based on how limited your imagination is. Like if you can imagine anything, you can always use that degree and make it work, right? I think it just really depends.
And I would also add to that, it's a great point, that this is one of those careers that you can recreate yourself every few years. So I have done so many different things in my career. When I started off thinking I only was going to work with children, and I've done everything from hospice to victim advocacy to refugee resettlement. As soon as I get into an area and I learn about something new, I think, oh my gosh, that's really interesting. And then I'd work my way, because we network, that's a big part of social work, to where I could move into a different field. And so in my career, I've done everything from when I became more interested in global issues. For about a year and a half after I got my PhD, I was a policy analyst for the government of Rwanda because my research focused on conflict in that region. So, and it was academic advisement, but still, it's like that's the range of what you can do in this career. So you don't get pigeonholed, you can work in the same field. But I also think, sometimes social work, well, oftentimes people think of it as a well-paying field because most of the helping professions are. But I think even that depends on what your expectations are. If you say yes to opportunities, I think it's one of those fields, I think as a society we're moving in this direction anyway, of multiple income streams rather than just one paycheck. So I always view streams, I do a lot of freelance, I've historically not now, but I've historically done a lot of freelance work editing. So I'm a writer, so I get paid as a developmental editor on a freelance basis. I still do it in the summer. Sometimes I do ghost writing, because I write textbooks, so if a publisher needs me to ghost write a chapter, I get paid for that. You can do part-time counseling. You can teach as an adjunct or part-time faculty. There's so many things you can do. But again, the colleagues that I know who probably, you know, I've had some who have worked for the same agency for 30 years. And I know other people who, and that wasn't for me, but I know other people who have their fingers in multiple different, you know, from direct practice to community development. I have a student, former student, who works for a bank in the department, in the division that does microfinancing for NGOs. So she was she focused on international social work. So she deals with international NGOs and works with developing countries and developing microfinancing programs. So it's all around poverty alleviation and human rights violations and assessing those programs. And she travels to these countries and works with the local communities. So it's the you know, the range is just very, very broad. I think that's what your passions are.
It's what you're imagining. This year, like 4 years ago, I didn't even realize, like for instance, the FBI hires specifically MSWs for their victim advocacy positions. And I'm like, how cool is that? You get to go walk around with a gun, be like Johnny Utah, FBI, and yet you're still a social worker. How cool is that? You know?
The police departments so I worked for a district attorney's office as the director of victim witness assistance. So I worked with every victim of violent crime in the county. This was in Chicago, a lot of crime. And it just was, every single day was different. And we were in court, it was just, we were interacting with, networking with other, because big part of social work is connecting clients to the community. And so that was a big part of the job. It was very interesting. And I wouldn't have thought of that necessarily as traditionally, although it was all social workers that worked in that department.
So we gave you a really long answer. Good answer is yeah.
Sky's the limit.
Good answer. Any other questions? Comments?
What are some ways that current undergrads, whether they have a couple weeks or a couple of years before they go into grad school, what are some ways that you would recommend that they prepare?
Great question. So I came in through Cal State Fullerton Department of Social Work as the admissions coordinator. So I used to review all of the applications. And so one of the things I always tell applicants is that internship, you know, you got to get some experience, whether it's volunteering or through your internship or just paid experiences, right? And this I think holds true for any field that you go into, you know, regardless of social work or not. It's like you really need to know what you're about to get into. You know, and I tell applicants all the time. It's like you're about to enter a potential 2-year relationship with this, and you need to understand pros and cons of that. And so if you don't have an idea, then you need to find it quickly. Because just like with any relationship, once you get in, it's difficult to get out. And sometimes it's very time consuming and it's challenging. And so you need to really understand that piece. The other piece too is not only do you need to know like your internship or having some experience is, you know, again, academically. I think nowadays academic is, especially in California, right? I think we talk about, you know, the difference between, you know, LA and Orange County and you know, just, you know, we got a lot of high competition. It's like 4.0 is like mediocre now. So you got to have that 5.0 if you go to UCI or whatever. And so the reality is this, unfortunately, because we are the only social work program in Orange County, there is a high demand and, you know, a lot of folks would like to go here. And so because of that, it really has made it much more competitive. And so I want to encourage you guys to really understand that piece, because it's not just your compassion and your empathy and your drive to be a social worker, but you also need to understand the academic has to be in line too. Because it's a graduate program, like I said, we treat you guys as professionals, but we also have higher education. and classwork is much more rigorous, right? In my class, you can only miss class twice. Third time, you just earn yourself another year in the program, right? And that is a very real thing. There is no playing around with that. And so academically, make sure that you guys, get your grades where they need to be. And then the last thing I would say is have a relationship with your instructors and professors, because when you apply, you need to have a letter of recommendation, right? And I've seen letters from the mayor and the governor. I don't care about those letters because they're all standard issue letters that, they're just, the letters that really stand out are those letters that the instructors or your employers can really speak to your passion and your dedication in the field. Those letters stand out so much more, and they have much more value and weight when it comes to the application process.
And I would add to that if you are passionate about this field, it will be demonstrated in your life and your life choices, meaning that you already will have those volunteer experiences, or maybe a job in the field. You will have connections in this field in some way. The academics, for me, it's the writing. If you're not a solid writer, the way to become a better writer are two ways: read nonfiction, and write. Reflection writing is very different than academic writing, but the best way to learn how to write academically is to practice, and then also to read either journal articles or nonfiction book where they have that kind of tone. You get used to it. So I think, and I think that the passion comes through. When you can't, you may not have the 5.0, or but if you have passion, it will jump off that application page, and it will be sincere. And even if you come to this decision late, there's a lot. You might wait a year to apply, and then get some work experience. And I waited several years between my undergrad and grad, and because I was kind of late in deciding exactly what direction I wanted to go. So I wouldn't be in a rush, and I would take the time to make sure your application is strong, but then also know that there's a lot of support. So even with the reason why we've got strict attendance policies is because when you're an undergrad, one class is typically 1 hour. Ours are 3-hour classes, so you miss one class, you miss a week. You miss 2 classes, now you've missed 2 weeks. Certainly if there's a crisis, we'll do everything we can to work with you, but it's not the same. There's a shift, kind of an attitude. When you come to grad school, this is your career now. You start building your reputation, because we're going to be all colleagues. So I can tell you, the students who just put everything they have into it, you don't know that down the road, I'm not going to be sitting on a board somewhere making a decision about something and your name pops up. And you want to make sure that in all ways you presented yourself professionally. Not perfect, because in 2 years, you're going to hit a crisis, you're going to hit a bump in the road. But I'll tell you, we're all very compassionate. This is our field. And we want to help people successfully complete the program. So it's a partnership, but I think one of the things that I'm so impressed with our students is that they put their heart and soul into this, to their work. Even it's a personal cost to them, and then we work together if there's some sort of an emergency or something like that. But it is, and then I've had some students say that it's actually easier, even though the work is more intense. It's easier because it's all focused on the same subject. So rather than spreading, you're taking math and geography and all that. All your classes are focused in one area. So in a way, it's become a really support system for each other as well. So
the last thing I will add to that is, my experience as an undergrad, I hated it. Like, I got my degree, but I hated it. Like, I vowed, since I got my degree, I vowed never set foot on campus again. Shouldn't have done that. And even when I was toying with going to grad school, like, I was working for DCFS, Department of Children and Family Services, and they were offering a scholarship for me to go back to school. Like, I rejected them twice. Like, I'm like, I don't want to go. I don't want to do this again. I'm good where I'm at. Just let me work. And it took a while for me to understand. And actually, my brother was the one that kind of really kicked me in the butt and said, your experience as an undergrad and your experience as a grad student will be completely different. Because, and this is what I also speak, and I don't want to speak on behalf of all of you, but for myself, you know, the difference, you know, how I can correlate the differences or explain the difference, like undergrad, I was just a number, or I was just considered just another person in you know, like I said, you know, my class was about 300, 400, you know, students. Whereas grad school, you know, it's in our best interest that you succeed. And what I mean by that is we want you to succeed. We will work with you to be successful. Whereas undergrad, it's like, you know what? As long as you hit that bell curve, that's all I really care. And so there's a huge difference, a different mindset, like Dr. Martin said. You know, you guys are professional. Like I said, you guys, we treat you as colleagues. And with that comes along, this higher expectation comes in too. You know, it is a challenge for you guys to work in grad school, but once you get in there, it is a very different mentality when you look at grad school.
And you could do it at home if you can. Well, in closing, what I'll say is that I loved undergrad, but for all the wrong reasons. I went to San Diego State, and I picked it because it was a party school back then. So I never read. I just, you know, I was a pretty good student, but I wasn't that serious. When I went to graduate school, I really questioned whether I had the dedication. I knew, you know, I suffered a lot of times with the imposter syndrome. Can I really do it? Do I belong here? I loved graduate school, but I had to learn how to be personally more accountable because I actually had to read and I actually had to do the assignments. The environment smaller. I loved the anonymity of not maybe come to class all the time. And but the other thing I would say is the focus shifts from I want to get all A's to learn content knowledge. So you'll never not get, you know, the students who come in from undergrad with saying I still want to get all A's. Why did I get a 95 rather than 100? Or, you know, I got an 89%. I've never gotten B's before. Those are the students who sometimes struggle a little bit more because they haven't done that shift yet to learning and not worrying so much about the grades. Of course, you need to do well, but you're not going to not get a job because you got a B in a policy class. But if you don't have content knowledge in that interview, then you won't get the job. And so that's the other shift too. It is challenging, but when you own your career and your own learning and you make that shift, I personally found it easier. I absolutely loved it then because I thought this is about me and my career and my learning, and I can do this. And there's no expectation that the perfectionism flies out the window then because it becomes more a reciprocal process of, you know, you don't know how to write a paper, then I'm going to help you learn how to write a paper. That's why you're in this graduate program, is to learn. So there's, again, taking that shame out of it and just owning your own learning process.
I don't know. I wasn't sure if you had any like information or anything.
Yeah. I think went over most of that.
So, well, thank you very much. If y'all can give our professors for the day, for the hour, a round of applause. We just want to say thank you. Very, very small token of our appreciation. I don't know how you all appreciated this, but I really appreciated like the overview of what you do, but also the real experience of like forcing us to think outside of